My name is Silas Granger. I'm 42 years old, a structural engineer by trade, and I lived, in a beige two-story home nestled in a cul-de-sac just outside Sacramento. From the outside, our house looked like every other on the block. Manicured lawn, two cars in the driveway, the occasional wind chime when the breeze came through. Normal, quiet. But silence, I've learned, is often the sound betrayal makes before it announces itself. I've been married to Nadia for 13 years. 13 birthdays, 13 anniversaries, and more than a few conversations where I ignored the warning signs because I didn't want to believe they meant anything. She was warm once. Thoughtful. We used to share everything. But over time, that warmth cooled to politeness, then to silence, and finally to something worse, indifference. I didn't want to believe it. Not until the day I came home early from work. That Friday started like any other. Morning traffic, stale coffee, polite nods to coworkers. By noon, a burst pipe at the site postponed my inspection. I could have stayed at the office and cleared emails, but something told me to head home. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the need to reclaim an hour of peace before the weekend noise. Either way, I didn't text or call Nadia. I just drove, humming low to some classic jazz and letting my mind wander toward dinner plans and laundry. I parked outside and noticed Mason's car in the driveway. That wasn't unusual anymore. He'd been temporarily staying with us for 3 months, ever since his second business folded like a bad poker hand. I agreed to let him crash with us. Nadia said he needed support. I gave it. Foolishly. I'd started regretting it 2 weeks in, but I kept my mouth shut, for her. I stepped inside quietly, the way I always did when I didn't want to disturb anyone. The living room was empty, but the hallway light near the master bedroom was on. I rounded the corner, slow, cautious, and that's when I saw it. My closet door wide open. Mason standing inside, folding my clothes. Not into neat stacks or onto hangers, but into boxes, brown cardboard boxes labeled with Sharpie, donation. There were 3 boxes already filled. My leather jackets, my work boots, even my favorite flannel shirt from college. He held one of my sweaters, the navy one Nadia used to steal in winter. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding my journals. Not reading them, yet, but cradling them like she was deciding whether to throw them out or skim them first. My scarf from Grandma Lillian, the one she gave me before she passed, was dangling over the edge of the box like a forgotten rag. I didn't say anything. Not at first. My heart didn't pound. It slowed. My breath didn't catch. It turned sharp, cold, like the air in a hospital room. I took a step into the doorway. Mason looked up. "Oh," he said, like I was the one interrupting. Nadia didn't even flinch. "You're home early," she said, casual, brushing her hair behind her ear. She always did that when she lied. "We were just reorganizing." Reorganizing. I repeated, my voice like gravel. I looked down at the box. My name wasn't just absent, it was being erased. "He doesn't wear half this stuff," Mason chimed in, placing the sweater into the box like it had no history. No point in letting it gather dust. I didn't scream. I didn't ask questions I already knew the answers to. I didn't beg or fight or yell. I turned around, walked down the hallway past the photos on the wall, wedding pictures, family barbecues, our trip to Vancouver, and opened the door to the storage closet near the den. I wheeled out the black rolling file cart. Heavy, metal, dusty from disuse. On top of it sat a red folder marked in my handwriting, legal ownership. I rolled it into the bedroom doorway like a nurse pushing a gurney into a crime scene. Nadia stood up. Mason straightened, suddenly unsure of his posture. I unzipped the folder and pulled out a stack. Deed of the house with my name only. Notarized prenup, audio transcripts, title records. I let them look. Let their eyes skim the bold black letters that said everything I never had to yell. "This house," I said calmly, "was purchased in full by me 3 years before we got married. The prenup affirms that, in case anyone forgot." I reached into the side pocket and pulled out a small plastic drive. "And just in case you were wondering, the security system records audio, not just video." Mason dropped the sweater. Nadia's face drained of color. "Silas." "No," I interrupted. "You don't get to say my name like it still means something to you." I bent down and picked up the scarf from the box, smoothing it over my hand like a relic. "This belonged to my grandmother, the woman who taught me to be kind to people who don't deserve it. I've clearly taken her advice too far." Mason cleared his throat like he wanted to speak. I didn't let him. "You don't get to play homeowner in a house you didn't build, finance, or contribute to. You don't get to stand in a closet that holds my memories and start boxing them up like they're last season's fashion. You think you've taken over? You haven't even begun to understand what I've kept track of. I stood there, letting the silence choke the air. Nadia looked like she wanted to cry, but didn't have the right script. Mason looked like he wanted to bolt, but didn't know where to run. I didn't raise my voice once. Power doesn't have to yell. It just has to stand still while others squirm. Don't worry, I added, wheeling the cart back toward the den. I won't stop you from finishing your little project. Just make sure you're packing the right things. Because next time, it might be your boxes by the door. Then I closed the door behind me, slow and certain, and sat in the den beside my folder of proof. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the man losing everything. I felt like the one finally waking up. They tried to clear me from the closet, but they just opened the door to something else entirely. Mason arrived with a duffel bag and a limp apology that I could already tell was as temporary as he claimed his stay would be. Just until I get back on my feet, he said, standing in the entryway with the kind of sheepish grin that turns sour the second you look away. I shook his hand, mostly out of obligation, and stepped aside to let him in. Nadia gave me a grateful smile, the kind she reserved for moments when she thought I was doing something noble. I didn't feel noble. I felt compromised. He took the guest room, of course. I'd freshly vacuumed it the weekend before, stripped the bed, fluffed the pillows. It wasn't much, but it was clean, peaceful. By the third day, that peace was gone. The door was always half open, music spilling out in muffled bass lines. Towels vanished from the linen closet, and my blender, the one I'd saved up for during my first year out of grad school, suddenly became Mason's morning ritual. He blended smoothies at full volume at 6:30 in the morning, whistling as he did. I sat at the kitchen island one of those mornings, watching him dump handfuls of spinach and protein powder into my blender like he'd bought it himself. I asked, casually, "You use this often?" "Every day," he said, not catching the edge in my voice. "Gotta keep the gut in check." He patted his stomach and chuckled like I was supposed to be impressed. I wanted to say something right then about boundaries, about respect, about how using someone else's things without asking was never part of any welcome mat. But I looked at Nadia, who sipped her coffee and said nothing. I watched her tuck her hair behind her ear again, the same way she did when she didn't want to take a side. It got worse. Little by little, Mason's things multiplied like mold in a damp corner. A second pair of sneakers showed up in the foyer. Then a stack of mail addressed to him, credit card offers, a failed business subscription, a letter from some energy startup he'd apparently lost money with. One Saturday, I went out to reorganize the garage, hoping to reclaim a little order, only to find that half the shelves were now filled with Mason's boxes. Unlabeled, messy, some were leaking what looked like motor oil, and perched right on top, my toolbox, open, half my wrenches missing. I asked Nadia about it. "He just needed a little space," she said. "The room was too cramped." "The guest room," I reminded her, "is for guests." "He's your brother-in-law," she shot back. "He's family." Funny how that word only ever applied when I was the one being inconvenienced. One night, I came home from work later than usual, dead tired, shoes pinching my feet, my brain fried from calculations and client calls. I opened the door and there was Mason, sitting on the couch in nothing but basketball shorts, remote in hand, watching some action movie at full blast. The smell of takeout clung to the air, my takeout. The pad thai I'd ordered the night before and marked with my name was half-eaten on the coffee table, chopsticks dangling from the container like an afterthought. "Help yourself," I asked, not even trying to hide the irritation. He grinned. "You weren't gonna eat it." "I was," I replied, setting my bag down harder than necessary. "Relax, man," he said. "You've always been uptight. Maybe loosen up a little." And that's when I saw it. The smirk. That little sideways twitch of his mouth like he was enjoying this, like testing me was a game and he was winning. Nadia walked in just then, still dressed in her office slacks and heels, unwinding her scarf from her neck. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice too casual. "Mason ate my dinner," I said. She sighed, already annoyed. "Not at him." "At me. It's just food, Silas. Food I bought. With my money." "Oh my God," Mason groaned. "You want a receipt? I'll Venmo you $5. I turned to him, jaw tightening. "Don't bother. Just keep your hands off what isn't yours." He leaned back, smug. "That's going to be tricky. You've got a lot of stuff lying around." Nadia laughed. Not loud, not hysterically, but enough. Enough to turn my stomach. Enough to make me realize that this wasn't just about a couch or a blender or even some stolen noodles. This was about space, about ownership, about how I was slowly being pushed to the edges of my own home. And they both knew it. That night, I sat in the garage with a beer and a headache, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter upstairs. I leaned against the workbench and stared at the wall, at the holes where my tools should have been, at the shelves cluttered with someone else's mess. I tried to remember the last time Nadia had laughed with me like that. The last time she touched my shoulder or asked about my day without scrolling through her phone. I couldn't. Mason had moved in like a guest. But now he walked around like a landlord, shirtless, opinionated, and arrogant. And Nadia let him, encouraged him. She used to tell me I was the glue that held things together. Now she acted like I was the stain she couldn't get out of the rug. In that moment, sitting there in my own garage like some forgotten tenant, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not even sadness. Resolve. Because I wasn't going to be a ghost in my own house. Not without a fight. And certainly not without a record of everything they took for granted. The day they boxed up my belongings was the day something inside me stopped pretending. I'd convinced myself for months, maybe years, that the distance between Nadia and me was temporary. A cold spell, a rut, something a weekend away or a long conversation could fix. But when I stood in the hallway, watching Mason fold my clothes and Nadia silently assist him, I saw it for what it really was. This wasn't clutter being cleared. It wasn't spring cleaning. This was extraction. A quiet, calculated removal. Like I was the expired tenant in a lease they were ready to break. Mason chuckled as he held up my old corduroy jacket. He never wears this stuff anyway. His voice was light, casual, like we were talking about junk mail. He shoved the jacket into the box without care, the same way you'd toss in an empty water bottle before taping the top shut. And then Nadia, my wife, my partner of 13 years, the woman who once cried in my arms when her father died and held my hand through my mother's surgery, actually laughed. He holds on to too much, she said, still folding one of my sweaters. I strained on the cotton like she couldn't bear to meet mine. I stood there, motionless. Not because I was confused. Not because I didn't know what to say. But because I understood, in that exact moment, that nothing I said would matter. They weren't talking to me. They were talking about me. Like I wasn't even in the room. Like I was some old piece of furniture they'd finally worked up the nerve to haul to the curb. The silence between Nadia and me had been growing for a while. She stopped asking if I wanted dinner. I stopped asking her about her meetings. She stopped kissing me goodnight. I stopped reaching for her at all. But I never imagined she would help her brother empty my closet like I'd already moved out. As if my absence was something that should have happened months ago, and they were just catching up to the timeline. That laugh of hers, it was small, quiet, but it echoed through me louder than any fight we'd ever had. It was her signature on the betrayal. I didn't yell. I didn't lunge at Mason or demand an explanation. I simply turned, walked into the den, and unlocked the file cart I kept beneath my drafting desk. It was black, steel, and weighed more than either of them could lift together. I'd labeled it in red Sharpie: legal ownership, prenup, audio evidence, title deed. Most of it had collected dust over the years. I'd never thought I'd need it, but now I did. I wheeled the cart back to the bedroom like it was a final statement. Mason was still holding one of my journals, the old leather-bound one I used when I was working nights on the bridge redesign project in Oakland. Nadia had flipped open another and was scanning a page. Her face was unreadable, but her hands trembled slightly. "Put that down," I said. Calm. Measured. Mason dropped it like it burned his fingers. "You don't get to touch what you didn't build." He looked at Nadia. She looked at me. I bent down and opened the first drawer of the cart, pulled out the house deed with my name listed as the sole owner. Then the prenup we both signed before the wedding. At her insistence, ironically, because she didn't want to end up trapped if things didn't work out, I laid out the pages on the bed, one by one. Then the thumb drive. I held it up. "You remember when we upgraded the security system last year?" I asked, not expecting a response. "You know how we like the audio alerts when the door opened?" Mason took a step back. Nadia blinked. "The cameras don't just show motion," I said. "They record sound too." I let the silence hang there, thick and full of implications. "Would you like to know what I heard last Tuesday?" I continued. "Or Friday night? Or the Tuesday before that?" Mason's smirk faltered for the first time. Nadia looked away. That's what I thought. I didn't need to play the recordings. Not yet. The knowing was enough. They didn't remember what they said when they thought I wasn't home. But I did. And now I had proof. The file cart wasn't just a bluff. It was the history they tried to erase, itemized, and documented. Mason cleared his throat. Look, man. Don't. I cut him off. Don't talk to me like we're equals. You've been mooching off this house, this marriage, and my patience since the day you walked through that door. You moved in like a guest and stayed like a squatter. He tried to reply, but I wasn't done. And you? I turned to Nadia. You didn't even flinch. You didn't ask if it was okay. You didn't wait for a conversation. You just folded me out of your life like I was dead weight. She finally spoke. I didn't think you'd fight it. There it was. The truth. Not buried. Not sugar-coated. She thought I'd go quietly. She thought the same man who'd once forgiven her for maxing out our credit card, who held his tongue when Mason stayed rent-free, who overlooked missed dinners and cold shoulders, would stay passive. She mistook patience for weakness. And that was her biggest mistake. I'm not fighting you, I said, rolling the cart back toward the den. I'm reminding you of the ground you're standing on. Because it's mine. I closed the door behind me and sat at my desk, staring at the hard drive in my hand. It was small. Cheap. Purchased from a clearance bin at an electronics store 6 months ago. But it held every recording, every time-stamped whisper, every betrayal wrapped in laughter. They tried to erase me from the space I carved out for all of us. But they didn't realize I never let go of the blueprints. They thought silence was submission. They were wrong. It was the beginning of strategy. That night, I didn't sleep in our bed. I sat in the den, the old leather armchair creaking beneath me every time I shifted. It used to be my reading spot, the one place in the house that still felt like mine. But even there, the air felt foreign now, stale and charged. My name might have been on the deed, but something deeper had already been stripped from me. The file cart sat beside me like a silent sentinel. I pulled open each drawer and went through every document again, one by one. The house title, purchased before our marriage. The prenup, signed and notarized. My salary stubs. Even the contract for the security system I installed myself, with full audio and video monitoring. None of it had changed. But I had. That hallway moment, watching them fold away my life, cracked something wide open inside me. The silence I once called compromise now felt like surrender. And I was done surrendering. At around 2 a.m., I opened the media folder on my laptop. Security footage. Dozens of clips. I scrolled past the ones I didn't need. Me making coffee, Nadia watching TV, the cat leaping onto the couch. But there were others. Ones I hadn't watched yet. Ones the system flagged for unusual activity based on volume levels and voices recorded. One clip was from 2 weeks ago. I clicked it. Mason's voice. If we pack enough, he'll get the message. My chest tightened. Nadia's voice followed. Low, deliberate. He won't fight. He never does. They weren't discussing storage. They weren't organizing. They were planning a quiet push, an emotional eviction, box shirts as a warning shot. That moment wasn't a slip. It was a message, one they were sure I'd accept without resistance. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, letting the silence wrap around me. It wasn't grief I felt. It was clarity. You can grieve something once it dies. But what do you do when it rots slowly while you're still living inside it? I got up the next morning and showered, dressed slowly, methodically, like armor. I didn't speak to Nadia, didn't even pass her in the hallway. I left without saying goodbye and drove to the other side of town, to Jared's place. Jared Wallace wasn't just my friend. He was a retired attorney and the kind of man who believed in documenting everything. We met 12 years ago at a city zoning board hearing. I liked him immediately. Sharp, principled, with a dry wit that cut through red tape like a scalpel. He opened the door in a t-shirt and plaid pajama pants, holding a mug of black coffee. You look like you didn't sleep. I didn't, I said. Can I crash your FO? We sat later that afternoon on his back porch while I showed him the files. The deed. The prenup. The audio clips. Jared listened without interrupting, sipping slowly, occasionally raising an eyebrow but never looking surprised. Jesus, he said after the last recording. She really thought you'd just roll over. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. You've got legal grounds for everything, he said. This house is yours. Mason has no lease. No tenant rights. And if she's not listed on the deed, well, the prenup holds water. She changed the locks, I said quietly. Without telling me. He stopped mid-sip. Wait, already? I nodded. Last night was the first I didn't sleep there. This morning, I got a text saying Mason thought it was for the best. He set the mug down hard. That's illegal. Even if you weren't married. You're the legal homeowner, Silas. They're trespassing now. I let the word sit with me. Trespassing. The people I once trusted most were now nothing more than unauthorized occupants. Let's not do anything drastic yet, Jared said. But it's time you start playing this smart. Emotion won't win this. Proof will. So we built a plan. That night, I sat on Jared's couch while he walked me through next steps like a military strategist preparing for a silent war. Step 1. Time-stamped inventory of everything in the house that was mine. Purchases, receipts, anything not covered in the prenup. Step 2. Download and back up every piece of audio and video evidence to encrypted cloud storage. Step 3. Stay calm. They expected a man who would sulk, not a man who would prepare. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was ready. Jared helped me draw up a timeline of documented incidents. The day Mason moved in, the date of the first footage, receipts from purchases Mason claimed as his, and text threads where Nadia subtly erased my position in the house. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't violence. It was precision. Death by 1,000 dismissals. And somewhere in all of it, I found my footing again. The hardest part wasn't the legal maneuvering. It was the emotional math. Counting the moments where I should have walked away. Adding up all the times I gave her grace, she didn't return. Subtracting the man I used to be from the ghost I almost became. I thought about the night Mason first moved in, how Nadia said, he just needs some support. I gave it, quietly, the same way I gave her room when she wanted to spend weekends recharging, when she started sleeping with her back turned, when she forgot our anniversary last year and said she was too drained to celebrate. I had excused so much in the name of love. But love doesn't box up your life and say nothing. Love doesn't lock the door and hand your spot on the couch to someone who mocks you in your own home. On Sunday evening, I drove back to the house. My key didn't work. I tried it again. No click. No give. For a brief second, I just stood there on the front porch, hand on the doorknob, as the late sun burned orange across the lawn. I thought of every time I'd pulled into this driveway after a long shift, happy just to be home. And now, I couldn't even get inside. So I didn't knock. I didn't call. I walked around to the backyard, past the hydrangeas I planted myself, and knelt beside the shed. Underneath a loose brick by the back step, the emergency key was still there. They'd forgotten about it. Slipping in through the laundry room, I found them in the living room, laughing at a cooking show, feet up, relaxed. Mason's socks on the coffee table. Nadia curled into the corner cushion like nothing was wrong. I stepped in. They turned. I held up the shed key. Forgot this existed, didn't you? Neither of them spoke. But their faces? Their faces said everything. They saw a ghost. But I was very much alive. And I was back. Sunday evening, the sky over Sacramento was washed in that strange orange hue that made everything look warmer than it felt. I sat in my truck for nearly 5 minutes after pulling into the cul-de-sac, just staring at the house that, up until 3 nights ago, I called home. It looked the same. Same white trim. Same hedges I'd pruned. Same welcome mat I laid out the day we moved in. The one Nadia said made the place feel official. But as I got out and approached the front door, I could feel it. Something was off. The air around it didn't feel like mine anymore. I slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I paused, removed it, checked again, like maybe I had grabbed the wrong one from the ring. I hadn't. I tried again. Nothing. The deadbolt had been changed. My heartbeat didn't race. Oddly, it slowed, like my body was bracing for impact. I rang the doorbell. Waited. Nothing. The porch light hadn't been turned on yet, and in that growing dusk, I could feel something final curling at the edges of the moment. I pulled out my phone. Me, did you change the locks? A few seconds passed. Then the message bubble appeared. Nadia, you needed space. Mason thought it was for the best. No question. No apology. Not even a pretense of remorse. My jaw clenched. Mason thought. That told me everything. It wasn't just that they were overstepping. It was that they no longer viewed this as my space at all. Mason had made a decision, and Nadia went along with it. Just like she did with my closet. Just like she did with my food. With my boundaries. With my place in our life. I should have turned around. I should have let the silence hang long enough for them to wonder what I'd do next. But I didn't. I wasn't leaving this time. I walked around the side of the house, past the gardenia bushes and the rotting fence post Mason swore he'd help me fix but never did. I knelt beside the shed and pulled up the flat stone near the base. The emergency key was still there. I palmed it, walked around the back, and unlocked the laundry room door like I had 100 times before. Inside, the air smelled of something faintly burnt, either dinner or a forgotten candle. I moved through the hallway slowly, my steps light on the laminate flooring, passing framed photos of us smiling at Lake Tahoe, at her sister's wedding, on our 10th anniversary in Napa. Lies, all of them. When I reached the living room, they were both there. Mason on the couch, feet propped on the coffee table like he owned the place. Nadia beside him, her laughter hanging in the air. They were watching one of those competitive cooking shows, the kind where people cried over undercooked risotto. I stood just inside the doorway and let the silence spread. Mason was the first to notice. He looked up, startled, then scowled. Nadia froze. I held up the shed key between two fingers. Forgot this existed, didn't you? Mason sat up straighter. You can't just walk in here. I laughed once. Lo, I can walk into my own house whenever I damn well please. You left, he said. You can't just. I didn't abandon the property, I cut him off. I took a weekend. And unless the law changed in the last 48 hours, my name is still the only one on the deed. Nadia stood now, her arms crossed. You needed space. No, I said. You needed space from the reality that you're squatting in a house you never paid for. And that ends now. Her expression faltered, flickered between guilt and indignation. She gestured toward Mason. He was just trying to help. Help? I said, stepping into the room now. By changing the locks on a house that doesn't belong to him? By deciding, without me, that I no longer live here? Or was the help more about making sure I didn't come back before you finished repurposing the rest of my life? You're overreacting, Mason said with a smirk that he couldn't quite hold steady. I turned to him. This house doesn't belong to you. You don't get to smirk here. You don't get to make decisions here. You're a guest whose welcome ran out the moment you started throwing out the owner's clothes. He stood up now, puffing his chest. I'm not scared of you. I didn't flinch. You should be. Not because I'll shout. Not because I'll throw a punch. But because I'm calm. And when I'm calm, I'm dangerous. I took a step closer, dropped the red folder onto the coffee table beside his feet. The one labeled legal ownership. He didn't touch it. Nadia opened her mouth. I raised a hand. Don't, I said. Don't defend him. Don't pretend this is some misunderstanding. You changed the locks. You let him decide where I sleep, eat, live. You laughed when he mocked me. And you helped box up my life like it was just clutter in the way of his. Her voice, when it finally came, was brittle. You left. Because I couldn't breathe. Because my own wife didn't even hesitate when her brother tried to erase me. And now you want sympathy because I walked back in before you were ready? I looked between them, both stunned, both standing in a house that no longer felt like home, at least not for them. You want to be a team? I asked. Then be one. Just not here. I turned, headed back toward the hallway. You have 24 hours to get legal counsel, I said without looking back. Because the next time I return, it'll be with a sheriff and eviction papers. Mason shouted something behind me, but I didn't catch it. Didn't need to. I knew what I was now. Not the intruder. Not the outsider. I was the reckoning they didn't see coming. And I had the keys. 3 weeks before the closet incident, I stumbled across something that didn't belong to me, but changed everything. It was a Saturday. The kind of afternoon when the house should have smelled like fresh coffee and sounded like a weekend. Instead, it was quiet except for the dull hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of Mason pacing overhead. Nadia was out with her friends, or at least that's what she told me. I was in the kitchen, reaching for a wrench from the junk drawer because Mason had once again borrowed and misplaced my actual tools. The drawer stuck halfway, wedged with menus, expired coupons, and crumpled receipts. I tugged harder. That's when I found it. A folded envelope, creased, coffee-stained, and nearly buried under a pile of unopened mail. It had a government seal on it. A California state court header peeked from beneath the fold. I recognized the look immediately. Legal documents had a way of screaming even when they didn't speak. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Superior Court of California. Notice of garnishment. Child support enforcement. Respondent, Mason Grady Reyes. My eyes narrowed. I kept reading. He had a daughter, 11 years old. Her name was Kennedy Caldwell. The custodial parent listed was Renee Caldwell, unfamiliar to me. The court had attempted to garnish Mason's wages 3 times already, but he had no verifiable employer. His listed address was ours. My house. I leaned back in the kitchen chair, the envelope still in my hand, and stared at the ceiling. Mason had always said he didn't want kids, claimed he didn't believe in bringing people into a world that punishes ambition. And yet here it was, in government ink, proof that he had a child. A child he was hiding. And now he was living in my home, eating my food, stealing my space, while running from his responsibilities. I clenched my jaw, standing too quickly as the chair scraped against the tile. The insult wasn't just personal anymore, it was systemic. He wasn't just overstepping. He was a coward, and worse, a liar dragging my name and my address into his mess. I snapped photos of the document with my phone, front and back. Then I scanned it using the printer in the den and uploaded it to a secure folder. I didn't know what I planned to do with it yet, but I knew I wasn't letting it disappear again under a pile of pizza coupons. Over the next 2 days, I did what I did best, researched. Quietly. Thoroughly. At night, when Mason was snoring and Nadia was glued to her phone, I was tracing court dockets and social records. I found her, Renee Caldwell, listed as the petitioner in a custody hearing from 6 years ago. Her current address was 2 cities away, and her employer was a medical supply company. I found her LinkedIn, her Facebook. She looked tired in most of her photos, like a woman who'd been doing everything alone for too long. On a whim, I drafted an email. Just facts. No emotion. I attached the court notice, mentioned that Mason was living under my roof, and said I had documentation. I didn't expect a reply. She responded an hour later. Is this real? He told me he was in Utah. He hasn't seen Kennedy in over 8 years. Please tell me this isn't a joke. I assured her it wasn't. She asked if I could provide proof he was living at my address. I sent photos, packages in his name, his mail on our counter, footage from the doorbell cam of him entering and leaving at will. I even sent a video clip of him on our front porch, mocking a telemarketer. She went silent for a day, then sent a final message. Thank you. The court will be very interested. And so will Kennedy. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. What I felt wasn't revenge. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was clarity. Mason didn't just disrespect my home. He abandoned a child, his own blood, and tried to live out his selfishness under my roof like it didn't reek of rot. I kept my mouth shut for the time being. Kept observing. Mason didn't know what I'd found. Neither did Nadia. They were still acting like I was some obstacle to move around, still dropping passive-aggressive comments about needing space and lightening the closet. But every time I passed Mason in the hallway, I looked at him differently, not just as a nuisance, but as a fraud who left a little girl to grow up wondering why her father disappeared. One morning, over coffee, I said to him, "Ever think about kids?" He looked up from his eggs, shrugged. "Nah, not for me. Too much pressure." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess it's a lot of work, trying to pretend you're not a dad." The color drained from his face for just a second. Just long enough. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said with a casual sip. Just a thought. That's when I knew he felt it. The shift. The ground beneath him beginning to crack. Maybe he didn't know how or when I found out. But he knew. And that uncertainty was the beginning of the end. Nadia didn't notice it then, or maybe she did and chose not to see it. But Mason had begun unraveling. He started spending more time in the guest room, doors closed, calls muffled. I overheard fragments, back pay, lawyer, proof I'm not employed. He was scrambling. And I stayed silent. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the trap. I had the garnishment notice. I had his voice on camera. I had correspondence with the child's mother. The legal system was a slow machine, but when it moved, it was deliberate. And now, it was moving toward him. I didn't tell Jared yet. I didn't want to play every card at once. But I kept the folder updated, every file stamped and organized. A chain of evidence that told a simple truth. They thought I was just holding on to clothes. But I was holding on to receipts. And now, Mason's reckoning was no longer just mine. It had a name. And it wore pigtails. They thought I wouldn't do it. For weeks, they paraded around my house like it was theirs. Mason with his cocky, unbothered strut. Nadia with her distant smile and sudden bursts of laughter that never reached her eyes. They carried on like I was some leftover page in a chapter they were ready to rewrite without me. I kept quiet. I watched. I collected. But silence, I've come to realize, is often mistaken for surrender. That was their mistake. Tuesday morning, I walked into the county courthouse with my documents in hand, a neat folder labeled Eviction Action, Granger Residence. The clerk, a tired woman with rimless glasses and a coffee mug that read, "Don't make me use my lawyer voice," looked up briefly as I approached. I'd like to file a formal 30-day eviction notice, I said. Tenant or guest? I placed the deed, the prenup, and the occupancy timeline on the counter. Neither. They're squatters. I'm the homeowner. She's my wife, a soon-to-be ex. He's her brother. Her eyes scanned the paperwork, brows slightly lifted. You've got the proof? All of it. She nodded and started typing. Keys clacked. Printer's word. And within 20 minutes, I had the paperwork in my hands, signed, stamped, and official. I paid the service fee to have them formally served because I wanted this to be documented to the letter. No surprise text. No emotional confrontation. No yelling in the driveway. Just the law. Delivered cold, clean, and undeniable. I requested the process server hand Nadia's copy to her directly at work. It wasn't to embarrass her. It was to remind her that the rules still existed, even if she'd been pretending they didn't. That same afternoon, I got a text from her. No greeting. No apology. Nadia, over clothes? Silas? I stared at the message for a long moment. The gall of it. The distortion. As if this had all begun over jackets and journals. As if this wasn't about disrespect and erasure and months, years, of being made small in my own house. I replied with 3 words. Me. Over betrayal, Nadia. She didn't respond. Later that night, I heard they laughed. Jared called me. He'd heard from a mutual acquaintance at her office. Said when she got the envelope, she rolled her eyes and said, Silas is having a meltdown. Mason, apparently, had told someone. He's bluffing. That man wouldn't evict a dog from a porch. They weren't just underestimating me. They were blind. Because they didn't know what else I had. Not just the eviction papers. Not just the deed. But the arsenal behind it. The court-stamped garnishment notice for Mason's hidden child. The email trail with Renee Caldwell. The video footage. The voice recordings. The text exchanges, Nadia calling me passive, and Mason mocking me with lines like, he's more furniture than man now. I had it all. And I was done letting them mistake my silence for weakness. That night, I sat in the den and opened my backup drive. I organized everything into folders, property rights, financial contributions, audio evidence, witness statements. Jared helped me draft a summary, just in case. If they tried to fight this in court, I was ready. If they tried to deny what they'd said, what they'd done, I had their words preserved in pristine .mp3 files. And yet, some part of me kept hoping stupidly, irrationally, that Nadia would come to her senses. That she'd knock on the den door, tears in her eyes, and say, I made a mistake. I got lost. That we'd go to counseling. That Mason would leave and we'd start over. Not because I still loved her. I think that part had withered long before the closet. But because I hated what we'd become. I hated that 13 years ended with a legal notice and 2 people laughing behind my back. But that knock never came. Instead, Mason got louder, bolder, like a man who thought he was winning. That weekend, I returned to the house. I hadn't been staying there since the night of the lock change, but I still had access and every legal right to be there. I let myself in, moved quietly through the place, and listened. Mason was in the kitchen, yelling into the phone. She's not going to get anything from me, he snapped. The court can't prove I have income. The guy's just mad I'm living better than he is. He didn't even lower his voice. Didn't care that I could hear him. And maybe that. I held up a keycard. You'll need this for the storage unit. It has all your things in it. Well, the ones you're still entitled to. You touch my stuff, he snapped. I boxed it, cleaned it, moved it. Everything labeled and sorted. Consider it more respect than you ever showed this place. He ended his call and glared. You can't just throw us out. You were never invited to stay. And now you're formally being removed. He opened his mouth, but I stopped him with a single word. Check the envelope. He found it taped to the fridge Jared's doing. Inside, the legal notice, the service record, the 30-day deadline. Nadia came home an hour later. I was still sitting in the living room when she walked in. She stopped mid-step when she saw me. You need to leave, she said. I raised an eyebrow. My house. She hesitated, then spotted the notice in Mason's hand. Her eyes darted back to me. You're serious. I'm done being erased. She crossed her arms. This isn't who you are. No, I agreed. This is who I became after trying to hold on to a marriage with someone who stopped choosing me. The silence was thick. You'll regret this, she said finally. I stood, walked toward the door. I already regret staying quiet for so long. As I left, I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. Because I wasn't interested in a dramatic exit. I was interested in closure, and justice was already underway. Tuesday morning, the sun barely peeked over the rooftops as I pulled into the driveway, my driveway. For the first time in weeks, I felt something steady humming beneath my skin. Not excitement, not revenge, something quieter, like balance returning after a long, brutal sway. I'd taken the day off work and left my phone in the glove compartment. I didn't want texts, calls, or distractions. Today was about action, about reclaiming what was mine, not with rage or noise, but with order. The locksmith pulled up right behind me at 7:45 sharp. An older man, broad-shouldered with weathered hands and a tool belt that had clearly seen decades of doors. "You the homeowner?" he asked, eyeing the house. "Yes, sir," I said, holding up my ID and the deed, just in case. He nodded and got to work. I stood by the porch, arms crossed, watching him remove the lock Nadia and Mason had installed. Every scrape of his tools felt like a cleansing. The final removal of the grip they had tried to assert. 30 minutes later, every entry point, front, side, back, had a new lock, new key, and a reinforced deadbolt. "For copies," the locksmith said, handing them over. "Only you." "Only me," I said, pocketing them with a nod. He left, and 10 minutes later, the moving truck arrived. A crew of 3 stepped out, 2 younger guys and a woman who looked like she could bench press the truck itself. Professional, efficient, polite. I'd made it clear in advance, this was not a full move. It was a selective extraction. We stepped inside, and I handed the crew foreman the printed instructions. "Guest room, hallway closet, and right side of the garage," I said. "Everything in those areas gets boxed and taken. Labeled by category. Leave the rest." He scanned the list. "You got it." They moved fast. Room by room. Piece by piece. Mason's entire setup, gaming console, dirty laundry, that worn duffel bag he always left unzipped like he might be leaving any second, vanished into labeled boxes. Guest room. Miscellaneous. Mason's clothes. Unlabeled electronics. In the hallway closet, I found 3 of my jackets, ones I thought were missing, crumpled at the bottom under an old speaker and a yoga mat. I didn't touch them. I pointed them out, and the movers packed them back into my own wardrobe in the master closet. Reclaimed. The garage was worse than I expected. Tools rusted from misuse, engine parts stacked like forgotten Lego bricks, and 3 crates of God knows what, half covered in a tarp. The movers didn't blink. They cataloged it, boxed it, loaded it. I stayed by the door and let it happen. There was something sacred in the restraint. The old me might have kicked one of those boxes or smashed something accidentally. But this version of me? He just documented, organized, decided. By 11:30 a.m., the house was stripped of every trace of Mason. I stood in the center of the living room, hands on hips, breathing in the clean space. His cologne no longer lingered. His shoes weren't scattered by the door. The couch no longer sagged with his weight. It looked empty. It looked right. The movers returned after lunch from the drop site and handed me the unit information. "Storage locations across town," the foreman said. "Unit 94B. Climate controlled. You've prepaid for 90 days. I nodded. "Perfect. Want us to leave the key inside?" I took a slip of masking tape, wrote in black ink. "Mason Reyes, Unit 94B. Paid through. September 15th. Contents claimed or discarded thereafter." Then I taped the key and the note to the inside of the front door. If he wanted his stuff, he could go claim it. No confrontation. No screaming. Just reality, staring him in the face the next time he stepped through the door, if he even could. With the house finally empty of Mason's debris, I moved from room to room like I was rediscovering it. I started with the master bedroom. I pulled down the curtains Nadia picked out, those pale beige ones with gold threading I always hated but never said anything about. Gone. I opened the windows and let the light pour in. Then I stripped the bed. New linens would arrive later that week. The old ones? In the donation bin by the garage door. The bathroom still had her products lined along the sink. I swept them into a plastic bin and placed them near the door. Her drawer? Emptied. Toothbrush? Tossed. Her robe? Bagged. I wasn't angry. I was methodical. By mid-afternoon, I'd finished. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh beginnings. No more clutter. No more mocking laughter bleeding through closed doors. No more shadow of Mason in the hallway mirror. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen island, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. I pulled out my notepad and wrote a short line across the top. Peace is what remains after the noise. I wasn't sure if I believed it yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something close, something steady. By evening, the sun had dipped low, casting golden bars across the floorboards. I did one last sweep: hallway, closets, under beds. Everything was in order. Everything was mine again. Before I left for the night, I placed a final envelope on the dining table. Inside, a copy of the storage note, a list of their remaining items, a copy of the eviction paperwork, and a brief handwritten line. This home was never yours to take. You just mistook my patience for absence. I didn't need to be there when they returned. Let them walk in, expecting to sit down on the couch with a snack and a smirk, only to find emptiness, silence, and a note from the man they thought they could erase. I locked the door behind me, feeling the new key settle into the lock with satisfying finality. For the first time in months, the house wasn't full of tension. It was full of space. And it was mine again. It was just after 8:30 p.m. when Mason pulled up in that dented black Mazda he loved to brag about but never bothered to maintain. The left headlight was still fogged. The back bumper rattled as he parked too close to the mailbox. I had just finished loading the dishwasher. The house was quiet, clean, still. My house. I didn't turn off the porch light. I left it on, not as a welcome, but as a spotlight. He walked up to the front door like he always did, overconfident, unaware, still under the illusion that this place belonged to him somehow. I watched through the narrow window beside the door as he reached for his keys. Click. Nothing. Another twist. Then another. His hand froze on the knob. A beat passed. He knocked, firm, loud, like he was the homeowner and I was the one behind borrowed walls. I stepped into the front hall slowly, keeping my pace even. I opened the window to my right just enough to let my voice carry. Check the envelope. He looked around, confused, until he saw it, taped on the inside of the glass, the key to the storage unit, the written notice, the deadline. What the hell is this? He barked. You're no longer welcome here, I said calmly. You can't do this. I just did. He stared up at me through the window. Silas, this is insane. I've got stuff inside my computer, already packed and waiting for you. Unit 94B, paid through September. After that, it's donated. He took a step back and gestured at the house like it had betrayed him. You really think this solves anything? You think you're the bigger man now? No, I said. I just stopped playing small. He glared at me, that twitch in his jaw surfacing, like he couldn't decide whether to argue or swing. I almost pitied him. Almost. But pity was the luxury of people who hadn't been disrespected in their own home. Then came the sound I'd been expecting. Tires on pavement, a second car pulling into the drive. Nadia. She got out slower than Mason. She didn't slam the door, didn't storm up the steps. She walked like someone who already knew what was waiting behind the glass. Her eyes flicked from Mason to me, then to the porch light, still glowing above her. She always used to love that light. Said it made the house feel safe. Now it lit up every inch of her disbelief. You changed the locks, she said, not a question. I did. You can't just evict your own wife, she said. But there was no conviction behind it. She already knew the answer. Legally, I can, I said. And I did. You were served. 30 days. That was a bluff. I raised my eyebrows. Then why are you both standing outside? She glanced at the envelope, I scanning the list of items and the eviction documentation. Her voice dropped an octave. You really went through with this. I had to. You chose him over respect. Over decency. She shook her head. You think this is about him? About boxes and closets? No, I said, stepping closer to the window. It's about everything you let slide. It's about watching me be pushed out of the home I built and laughing while it happened. It's about silence, Nadia. Yours. When it mattered most. She swallowed hard but said nothing. Mason cut in, stepping forward. So what now? You just expect us to vanish. I tilted my head slightly. No. I expect you to respect the law. And the boundary. He scoffed. You don't get to draw lines after all these years. Wrong, I said. I should have drawn them a long time ago. Now I'm making up for lost time. He looked ready to burst, hands balling into fists. But even Mason, as reckless as he was, knew better than to threaten a man holding court in his legally owned home. Nadia finally spoke again, her voice thinner. You really think you're going to be okay after this? I already am, I said, unlocking the window just enough to let my voice come through without shouting. You two turned this place into something unrecognizable. I'm just restoring what you tried to erase. The sound of sirens wasn't necessary, but it came anyway, right on time. I hadn't called 911. I didn't need to. I'd called the non-emergency police line earlier in the day and asked about legal enforcement of an eviction in case of pushback. They said they'd send an officer on a courtesy pass-by that evening, just in case. The cruiser pulled up slow, headlights washing across the lawn. Officer Morales stepped out, young, sharp-eyed, and already briefed. I met him halfway down the front walkway with the documents in hand. "Evening," he said. "Evening, officer. These two are trying to re-enter a home from which they've been formally evicted." He scanned the paperwork. "You the homeowner, Mr. Granger?" "Yes." He nodded and turned to Mason and Nadia. "You've been served these notices?" They both nodded. Mason mumbled something about it being personal business. "This man has full legal authority to deny entry," Morales said. "If you try to force entry, it becomes a trespassing violation. You'll need to remove yourselves from the premises now." Mason's jaw dropped. "This is bullshit." The officer raised a brow. "What you think it is doesn't matter. What it is legal. Let's not make this harder than it already is." Nadia stared at me, a hollow silence in her eyes. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked softly. I didn't flinch. "Anywhere but here." Morales stood between us now, arms folded, not threatening, just firm. "Time to go." They stood there for another moment, hoping I'd waver. Hoping I'd show some crack, some sentimental weakness. But all I showed them was the porch light still burning. They turned and walked away with nothing but the duffel bags they had in their cars. No boxes. No luggage. No laughter this time. Just silence. And when the engine finally faded down the street and the officer nodded a polite goodbye, I stepped back inside and locked the door behind me. The porch light clicked off on its own an hour later. But by then, I was asleep. Alone. And at peace. The first morning after they were gone, I woke to quiet. Real quiet. Not the kind that hides tension behind bedroom walls. Not the silence that feels like someone's holding their breath in another room. This was stillness. Clean. Restful. No blender whirring at sunrise. No Mason stomping down the hallway in sneakers he never unlaced. No half-laughs from Nadia as she read texts I was never meant to see. Just sunlight creeping through freshly washed windows, the soft tick of the thermostat, and the rustle of tree branches beyond the backyard fence. I didn't jump out of bed. I didn't have to. I laid there, in the center of a mattress I had ordered 2 days after they left. Firm, supportive mine. The old one, hauled away with the rest of the memories. Nadia used to sleep on the edge, curled away from me, her body a wall between us. Now, there was nothing but open space and air that smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. For the first time in years, I stretched without brushing against rejection. Later that morning, I made coffee. My coffee, brewed in a pot that no longer sat beside Mason's protein shaker or Nadia's matcha packets. The counter was clear. No stains. No crumbs. No competition for space. I leaned against it and sipped slowly, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling. The mug was warm in my hands, an anniversary gift from our 3rd year. I should have thrown it out. But not everything needs to be discarded to move forward. Some things just need to be held differently. The news about Mason hit my inbox 2 days later. Renee Caldwell had followed through. She filed a motion to reopen the child support garnishment case. Armed with photos, documentation, and the updated address I had quietly provided, she presented a strong claim. I didn't need to testify, she had enough. But I offered to sign an affidavit confirming his residency in my home for over 3 months. My lawyer reviewed it. It was airtight. By the end of the week, Mason's bank accounts were frozen. His court hearing was expedited. A judge ruled he owed nearly $37,000 in back payments, not including penalties and interest. The smug smirk he wore so comfortably? Gone now, reduced to courthouse footage captured by a reporter following the deadbeat parent backlog for a local station. I didn't gloat. I didn't repost. I didn't even watch it more than once. That wasn't my closure. My peace didn't come from Mason's downfall. It came from no longer having to lock up everything I loved behind silence. Nadia's fallout was quieter, but just as certain. Jared, my friend turned advisor, filed a formal letter to her company's HR department. It wasn't petty. It was professional. Included in the packet were screenshots of text messages Nadia sent on company time. Some personal. Some mocking clients. One message, sent at 11:43 a.m. during a scheduled meeting, read, "Silas is a shell. I just need Mason to push him out. Once he's gone, I'll figure it out." Apparently, her firm took reputation seriously. They placed her on probation, forced a leave of absence. According to one source, she was removed from a client-facing role indefinitely. Again, I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled. They tried to erase me from my own life. Instead, I erased every excuse they thought they could hide behind. The funny thing is, people assumed I'd be angry forever. Bitter. That I'd walk around with a chip on my shoulder or try to replace them with loud new distractions. I didn't. I didn't need to. I painted the bedroom a soft slate gray, replaced the old curtains with wide wooden shutters that opened fully every morning and let the world pour in. I donated the dishes Nadia picked out from that overpriced registry boutique. I replaced them with a set of matte black stoneware, clean lines, smooth in the hand, sturdy enough for everyday use. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it teach me. I learned how to cook things she never liked. Thai basil chicken, garlic rosemary potatoes. I played music again, real music, not the kind Mason blasted while working out in the guest room. I pulled out my old guitar from storage, restrung it, and sat on the back porch strumming for the first time in years. And I laughed. Quiet, surprised laughter. Not because of someone else's joke, but because I remembered who I was before I shrank to keep the peace. Neighbors noticed the change. Rob, from 2 houses down, asked where Mason had gone. I just smiled and said, the guest room finally found some rest. He chuckled and offered to help me reseal the fence Mason never touched. We finished it on a Saturday, and I bought us both beers afterward. A few weeks later, I stood at the end of the driveway, watching a new porch light flicker on automatically as the sun dipped behind the trees. A motion sensor bulb, nothing fancy, but it worked. It didn't burn for guests anymore. It didn't flicker for intruders. It burned for me. I went inside, locked the door with my new key, one of one. I walked through the halls with bare feet against clean tile and paused in front of the closet, the same one they once tried to empty like I was a ghost they were done with. Now, it held only what I chose to keep. My jackets hung evenly spaced, aired and brushed. My journals lined a small shelf beside my late grandmother's scarf, folded with care in a cedar box. I ran my fingers along the fabric, not for grief, not for nostalgia, but because I could. I didn't just reclaim my space. I reclaimed my right to take up space. People still ask if I've heard from Nadia or Mason. I haven't. I assume they're licking their wounds, rewriting history for anyone who'll listen. That's fine. Let them tell whatever story they need to survive. I'll tell mine like this. They thought they could box me up like an old coat, but I kept the receipts. And now, what they left behind is an emptiness. It's clarity. It's breath. It's peace. And that peace? It's loud in the best way.